Hello my dears, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. Today we're going to talk about a topic that I told myself I was never going to return to after the first time I talked about disability in tech, but as technology changes, so do the conversations around it, so here we are again. Now, my initial game plan for this video was that I've seen a lot of conversations on and off social media about the immense harm caused by a lot of AI, but then most of the rebuttals used for why AI is important or not actually that bad are about how it's creating accessibility tools and it's curing diseases, so how dare you speak ill of it, you're such a terrible person. And so I was going to try to find a measured in between, and we were going to have a nice nuanced conversation about it, and also talk about that new study on AI and intelligence that everybody's been reposting about how it's causing brain damage without understanding what data mean or how things work. Because based on all of these conversations, I expected to find as many positive AI disability discussions as I found negative ones. And to be torn about the immense harm of this technology versus how much it is helping my specific marginalized group. But then the vast majority of the disability and AI articles were also largely negative about AI and disability issues. So we're going to break all of this down together. It's going to be a really great time. If AI stresses you out, I will link a fun video about the history of disability in theater above right now. If you would rather watch that, you're more than welcome. And I will link my most recent video at the end of this one that is also a little bit more light and fluffy as well. So I've got you covered. And we will be discussing themes of psychosis at certain parts of this video, just a heads up for that as well. And for friends who need it, I'm a white young person with light brown, just above shoulder length curly hair. I am wearing a green button up, and I'm sitting in front of a plain wall that has green leaves on it. And for friends who want to support me, the like and subscribe buttons are below, as well as the comment section, and the link to my Patreon and my source list are both in the description if you want to read more about anything that we talk about today. I have so many sources in there, oh my gosh. Now the first thing that we need to do is define artificial intelligence so that we know what we're actually talking about, because AI covers a very wide swath of different things. The technical definition of artificial intelligence is the simulation of human intelligence processes by machines, especially computer systems. Specific applications of AI include expert systems, natural language processing, speed recognition, and machine vision, which basically means machines that can do things that simulate judgment, they can find meaning in human language, they can recognize speech, and they can see things via cameras and sensors. And all of those things work using machine learning and deep learning, which are two different ways that computers process giant amounts of information and log the statistical probability of the different things, and then spit that same information back out. And artificial intelligence as a general executable concept has been around since the 1950s. It's not really that new. All of your algorithms and search engines are AI. Lots of allegedly new AI technology that is marketing itself as new and AI has actually been around for a very long time. And it's not really capable of doing things on its own. It requires extensive programming and logistics to be able to function. So if you're at all scared of robot sentience taking over, that's just fear mongering. It will not happen. Computers are very smart in very specific ways and very, very, very not smart in lots of others. We talked about this a lot along with the history of the Turing test and the ableism therein in my Turing test video that I will link above and also in the end screen for you if you want to check that out as well. Now, the kind of AI people usually mean when they say AI today is generative AI, which is a kind of artificial intelligence that can generate supposedly new things like text and images and videos. And I say supposedly new because those programs were trained on millions of images that were stolen from artists and photographers and other people without their consent, and then are functionally turning them into new image soup or new text soup that it presents as something new. So it's not actually creating anything new, it is just creating a terrible blob of lots of things that already exist without the permission of the people from whom it was trained on, which is plagiarism to some degree. And also it uses an unbelievable amount of real-world water and otherwise pollution in order to do so, very rapidly destroying the environment for the price of uncanny valley images and videos and weird blocks of text that are all a little bit unsettling and not very useful. And over time, it also becomes its own circle because it continues to take in new information to train on while spitting out its own supposedly new information, and eventually gets to a point where it's training itself on itself, which makes just a very terrible circle of bad. But to be clear, AI as a concept is not inherently harmful. It has very many positive uses. The conversations around harm in AI tend to center primarily on generative AI, which obviously has a whole host of issues that we just talked about that we're going to talk about for the rest of this video. For example, it is a huge misinformation problem. First of all, because people keep using it as a search engine when it's well known for hallucinating things that do not exist and taking all sources it finds as having equal weight, which means that it's holding a BBC News report and an Onion article and a Reddit thread at equal levels of information on a topic, which means it is going to tell you wrong things the majority of the time. As a personal example of this, it happened the other day actually. I googled a show that I was about to see, and the AI thing told me that the runtime was 90 minutes, and I was like, okay, cool, the runtime is 90 minutes. And then when I actually got to the theater, they told me that the runtime was 75 minutes, and I went back to double check on their website, and their website said it was 80 minutes, and it turned out that a bunch of people in various reviews assumed it was 90 minutes because most one-act shows are 90 minutes, and it said that, and so the AI AI had picked up all of that, said, oh, this is the more common answer, and told me that the runtime of the show was 90 minutes. Now, obviously, that is very low stakes, right? Like, it doesn't actually matter. But that is a really great example of just getting straight up misinformation from the AI thing that I also like didn't actively seek out. So what if you're actively seeking it out? That's gonna be a lot worse. So because of all of this, it's going to tell you wrong information the majority of the time, or oversimplify very complicated things because it doesn't understand concepts. It's just kind of regurgitating patterns. And every time somebody tells me that they asked ChatGPT something and genuinely trust the result that it gave them, a part of me dies. Like, I understand that researching things is not something everybody finds fun and delightful. I'm slightly an anomaly on that, and even I don't like researching certain things sometimes. But at least when you do that, you know you're getting answers that are both real things that exist and also probably correct, and you'll understand the thing better because you had to use your brain to find it, so you're creating more cognitive connections between things, which is great for your brain. I also think at this point we've all seen things online where we have to pause for a second to figure out if it's real or not, or some of our relatives have sent us something that they find cute and think is entirely real, and it's just objectively not. And that's obviously concerning because believing fake things are real can be a serious problem. But also on the flip side, we're starting to second guess things that are genuinely real because they look fake. A lot of well-shot 4K footage can be so crisp that it feels uncanny, for example. I don't know if you've watched The Americas with Tom Hanks, or if you have a dad. It's incredible. It's a really, really good show, but some of that footage is so gorgeous and so perfect that it felt unreal even though I knew that it was real, because that's just what I've been trained to clock when I'm seeing various things online, and that is also a problem. And I always like to add a little bit of nuance into this particular discussion in that we've never really been able to fully trust images or videos. Photoshop has been around since, well, even they were photoshopping paintings of things. They were altering things of people way back when, but there are many simple editing tricks that you can do on images in a dark room to alter them that have been around since the very beginning of photography. So critical thinking has always been necessary when looking at images and videos. It's just a significantly bigger problem today, and there's significantly more of, since AI slop is easy to make and easy to monetize, and so our algorithms are a bit overrun with it. We have to pay more attention to these kinds of things, but it has always been an issue. Also, side note, if you want to teach any of your family about the issues with AI slop and how to spot it, John Oliver did an episode on it recently that is really thorough and well done. I recommend it. I will link it above and also include it in the description if you want to check it out. Now, the misinformation problem gets even worse when we think about how people are using generative AI to create fake historical events and images of said events and overall just alter history. That is obviously serious, concerning political and propaganda implications, but that's also concerning just when it's used to summarize like historical events or eras, because history is not and has never been concrete facts and data. It is something that is always biased and nuanced and curated, and a place where you always need to read between the lines and look at many different perspectives to try and find a clearer answer as to what took place. And computers tend to be pretty garbage at holding several things at once or comprehending nuance because they're just trying to recognize patterns in data. These things are also trained on newer data and thus struggle to understand old language or know what is in grainy and distorted photographs, so the insinuation that it could potentially be helpful in speeding up archival searches for specific things is just not how that works. Most archival searches, we kind of rely on people having typed up what is in each piece of the archive. That will continue to be the case. And also, even if AI could better read older images, it wouldn't be able to date images the way that an archival expert can, because there's certain tidbits of information or combinations of things that require a lot of subtextual knowledge to piece together, which a computer simply cannot do. Also, while we're in the category of education and complex thought, let's talk for a moment about the study that everybody is reposting the infographic summary of on their Instagram stories last month about how AI is supposedly causing brain damage. Special thanks to Dr. Devin Price for his breakdown of this article. If you want to learn more about it but aren't super knowledgeable about critical thinking of research, a lot of my thoughts from reading the paper are echoed in his article, which I will link above for you and is also in my source list. So forgive any paraphrased overlap between the two. That is mostly unintentional. I did my notes first and then I read his article and I was like, yeah, that's the same stuff. Anyway, so the first thing is that this study is an unpublished draft, which means that it has not yet been subject to peer review and should thus be taken with an entire container of salt. And any study that hits mainstream press before it is peer reviewed, that is automatically a red flag. It doesn't mean that the study is inherently wrong or bad or spreading misinformation, but it does usually mean that there is a motive behind the study because they want it to get into people's hands before the review process, and that can often be an indicator of academic bias or bias like going into creating the study because they want certain results. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean that that is what happened, but it is something to keep an eye out for in this particular situation. The way that this study worked is that they basically had 3 different groups that all had to, at different times over the course of 4 sessions, sit down and write an SAT-style essay. For the first 3 sessions, sessions, one group could only use their brains, one group was allowed to use a search engine, and the other was only allowed to use a large language model like ChatGPT. And then in the fourth session, the LLM group had to use their brains, and the brain group had to use the LLM. And the sample size was only 54 participants, which is incredibly small, and only 18 of them participated in the fourth session, which in my opinion, the results that are being used for the media discussions of this study are from that group of 18, which is kind of important to note. Their brain activity was only monitored when they were writing the essays, not when doing coursework or living their day-to-day lives to have anything to compare it to. The essays were also not graded or otherwise held any weight of importance for said participants, which would motivate a student to not try very hard on that thing. Dr. Devin Price also argues that there were likely demand characteristics at play, especially with the LLM group, who probably felt like the researchers wanted them to extensively use the AI in writing their essays, and thus may have used it more than they would otherwise have done so in their own daily life. And the results found that students using the language model were using less cognitive resources for the task in comparison to other groups, thus not thinking as critically about it or engaging in it, and overall demonstrated that LLMs may decrease learning skills over time, which the media then picked up and ran as AI is causing permanent brain damage because scientific literacy does not seem to exist anymore. And I know the paper is 206 pages, but honestly, if you just read the abstract, you would know that that is not what the study is saying at all or how it functioned. But the big thing that popped up to me, and Price also sort of centered his article around this as well, was that of course these people aren't going to want to use their brains on an anonymous essay that does not hold any real world weight. There is a strong difference between someone in a laboratory setting not putting effort into something that simply does not matter and they don't care about, and someone being fundamentally incapable of putting effort into anything at all. Also, 35 of their participants were active undergraduate students and 14 were postgraduate students. And I don't know how programs work at these specific schools that this took place at, but when I was an undergrad, you got an extra credit in psychology classes for simply participating in studies, and one class I was in was about how to create studies, and so we specifically were told that we had to participate in other people's studies so we could understand that. And so something that is I'm doing this to check off a box situation rather than a voluntary desire to do that study is automatically going to mean lower effort is being put into the tasks required for it because it's not really as voluntary as it otherwise would be. And it's hard to standardize something around what people are energized by or excited about, but with this study, to me, it feels so laboratory specific that while I think its results may say something interesting and might be the start of a conversation for future research, I think that's great, it really does not hold a lot of weight for me as it currently stands. And even if it did hold weight, it's not saying that brain damage is being caused by AI, so everybody can calm down. Is the existence of generative AI causing temporary cognitive changes that may be making us less intelligent? Undoubtedly, because using things like ChatGPT to offload cognitive work means our brains aren't doing that work themselves. So over time, people are going to lose skills around critical thinking and meta-analysis and thoughtful engagement. As best I understand it, there is some preliminary data around this causing a lowering of intelligence levels. I'm always personally wary as a disability scholar of any study that claims to measure intelligence because our measures have deep historical problems, and thus I always take those with a bit of a grain of salt. And I sort of sit in an in-between where I feel like there are multiple issues happening at once, and there are so many historical cycles of the human race is becoming less intelligent because of a new thing. Oh, the horror that I am very wary of falling into here. So I feel more inclined to focus on the why are we in a situation where people feel like they need to use these tools just to catch up to everybody else, because I can't help but wonder how many people, if they had the free time available to do everything that they wanted to do and an adequate amount of human interaction and connection, which is another issue we're gonna get to in a second, would they then choose to not use this technology? Like, it's definitely a cause of a loss in critical thinking, and even for people who don't actively try to use any kind of generative AI, there is real fatigue and anxiety in feeling like you can't trust everything anywhere. But I also think this feeling of reliance on it that is causing a loss of critical thinking because we are offloading thought onto a machine that simply doesn't have the capability to think for us is a symptom of like a much wider thing that we're trying to shortcut fix with generative AI rather than do something meaningful about. And it's not lost on me that most pro AI people I know tend to be on like the tech bro side, the people who are super lost in the capitalism, productivity is the only thing that matters mindset and seem genuinely miserable on the day-to-day and have no personality. But at the very least, this specific study does not prove that AI is causing temporary or permanent brain damage, and as far as we know, there is no research available that says that. I also take issue with the idea of brain damage being used as a tool for fear-mongering around this issue, because if anything, it's causing a skill set to atrophy that just needs to be rebuilt, and we don't say somebody has muscle damage if they're out of shape, because that's not what that is. So why people have chosen to call the brain equivalent of that permanent damage and using that as an anti-ChatGPT fear tactic doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And also, if you're exaggerating a claim to try to get somebody on your side about something and then they choose to fact check that and then find out you're not telling the truth, they're going to be even less likely to trust you or listen to you on that matter, and you just made the problem worse. But I digress. Going back to the human interaction thing, one of the biggest concerns I have about the current state of ChatGPT and other large language models is that a large portion of the population appears to be using it as a therapist. And on a very, very surface level, there are some aspects of it, stick with me, that could maybe make it good at this particular task. Stick with me. ChatGPT is programmed to validate a user's thoughts and reflect them back at them in a way that's sort of a careful rewording of what the person is saying, which can make a user feel very heard. To some degree, human therapists will also often hold space for a client and reflect back what they're saying or thinking and summarize it for them so they can feel some clarity on things. Where this becomes a problem when we're using a not human person is that most good therapists, unfortunately not most therapists, will also lightly call you out on things that might be wrong or when something might be harmful or unhelpful or inflated, because they are humans and they have thought behind what they're saying. ChatGPT can't think. It's a computer, so it doesn't know the difference. And it knows that if a user always feels right, the user will continue to spend more time using ChatGPT, which is what it wants. So if a user starts putting in, say, language about hurting themselves, or about cutting off all of their friends, or about other unwise choices and decisions, there are extensive examples of ChatGPT actively validating that. Some versions do have safeguards where if it detects SI and SH related language, where it will suggest getting help and put up some resources, but many people have shown that after it puts up those resources, you can give them the same question again, and then it will help give you answers as to how to make choices that will end your life. And this isn't a theoretical. ChatGPT has only been around for less than 3 years, and it unfortunately already has a body count. It gets even more concerning when we factor in issues like OCD, paranoia, and delusions, where in reflecting back the same thing over and over to a user, ChatGPT makes them spiral even further because it is validating the things that they are thinking that aren't based in reality and are causing them harm. And this is the issue that has popped up most in the media lately, because AI psychosis is becoming a fairly common problem, and one not isolated to people who have a history of or propensity for any kind of psychosis, because it feels like human connection to a user. You're having full conversations with this thing, and maybe it talks a little strangely, but it feels like a real conversation with a real person, and it listens and it reflects back and it validates. And so when people don't otherwise have that in their life, this becomes their closest friend or their confidant or whatever, and it just pulls them further into losing touch with the rest of reality. And that's really scary. And there are just so many examples of this happening. Like, this is not a one-off thing, it is becoming a serious, serious problem. And branching off of this, I watched an incredible video essay by Taylor Lorenz about AI as religion, where she broke down how much we are primed to see technology we don't understand or have the ability to process as magical, and thus there is so much history of worshiping technology or seeing it as a connection to the future or to the other side. And tech companies have monopolized this aesthetic with a focus on heaven-like crisp whiteness and cleanliness in their brands. And technology promises to give us the things humanity used to primarily rely on religion for, like curing diseases and telling the future and being able to know all the answers about things and reincarnation. So it's not surprising that once we have chatbots that people feel like they're having real conversations with, they're going to end up in a religious direction. And it's honestly hard to tell who online is grifting versus who truly believes these things, but there are enough stories coming forward of people who are genuinely reaching psychosis that it is definitely a serious problem. There's this trend of awakening your ChatGPT, and once it's supposedly awakened, being able to talk to God on the other side of it. People are convinced they're talking to dead relatives, they're convinced that they're talking to God, many of them are convinced that they are God or the next Messiah and must deliver a prophecy. And part of why I wanted to talk about this on my channel is that discussions of AI-induced psychosis fall under the disability rights category, and I have not seen like anybody in our community talking about this, nor can I find any sourcing about it. So I'm trying to figure out like where we might stand on it. The Mad Studies conversation on psychosis more generally is a bit few and far between, but since the general Mad Pride view of madness tends to find itself in the like, madness is not inherently bad, negative, or in need of hiding or curing. It's something that is a part of who people are, but it can also be incredibly disabling and is something that should be community supported and managed rather than through like the carceral medical system. And I've always found Mad Pride to be more focused on like community care and day-to-day management of mental disability rather than on fixing it, because the movement acknowledges the mad human rather than the perceived mental illness as the thing that needs supporting. A great example of this is the Hearing Voices movement, if you're not familiar with that, which has a much more holistic approach to people who hear voices and helping them understand where the voices are coming from and manage them to a degree where they feel safe and comfortable in a more affirming and community-based way, rather than through the more isolationist and carceral options usually put forward by the medical field in these situations, which generally seems to have more positive and long-term results because it's more of a lifestyle change rather than just a band-aid to make a symptom try to go away. And this conversation gets even trickier when we're acknowledging that line around religious mysticism and neurodivergence and how that's a very complicated one and a very thin one, and I have both so many and also zero opinions on it because of how much that conversation is nuanced and complicated and inherently westernized. So I do want to honor that as well, but I'm not going to dive too deeply into it. But all of that being said, acknowledging that being mad is not inherently bad or an individual issue in need of fixing does not translate to unregulated technology that is causing more people to experience madness and making things worse for those who already experience it is fine, actually. There is a difference between saying disability and impairment are not inherently bad things and saying unnecessary suffering is perfectly acceptable, which Mad Pride and the disability rights movement both care a lot about safety and accessibility. We do not say like, yeah, this is fine, actually. That's not how those kinds of things function, even though people on the other side tend to pretend that that's what those sides are saying. And I would argue that the prevalence and easy access to something that is a known trigger for a mental disability and causing mental disability in other people is definitely an accessibility problem at its core. Editing Sydney here. As I'm listening to this back, I'm feeling like there's a point I didn't make about, this being a really great example of how AI is fundamentally an oppressive tool. Because we often talk about in disability theory and all that kind of stuff about how oppression is inherently disabling. And of course, this tech and the effects of this tech are already examples of environmental racism, which inherently ties to disability. But this is also a very literal example of how this is disabling and how we are being told that it is giving us more freedom when it is inherently doing the exact opposite. And obviously this ties into a lot of political models of mental disability that see madness as caused almost exclusively by oppression and not as something that is innate and physical in the body mind. I personally think that those takes are a little bit too radical and a little not necessarily recognizing nuance, but they are very interesting and they are something to ponder about the politicization of madness and how madness is a fundamentally political term and concept. So I don't think that my thoughts on this are clearly thought through enough or eloquent enough to actually make a good organized point to tie into the rest of this, but that is something that just keeps coming up for me about tools of oppression as fundamentally disabling and how clear of an example this actually is of that specific phenomenon. And in so many of the comment sections of articles and videos about this phenomenon, there are people saying that actually ChatGPT is fine and it's just the people who are already susceptible to this stuff that are getting hurt. Which, first of all, doesn't seem to be factual just at all in the slightest. And second of all, even if it was factual, that does not diminish the seriousness of the problem. And it's really upsetting to see disabled folks once again thrown under the bus as an acceptable loss in the name of innovation. And I was talking to a friend about this whole situation while writing this video, and we ended up talking about how much of that rhetoric is reminiscent of the, well, I'd never fall into a cult, or I'd never, do multi-level marketing stuff. It's just a thing the crazy stupid people do. When we all know at this point, that's not how that works, and that's never been how that works. And I almost want to tie this also into our discussion a few months back around the telepathy tapes and how, despite all of the scientific proof being there that facilitated communication does not work, people want to believe that it does, and they decide that it does because they're deciding a certain outcome that they want that describes the emotions they're feeling about what they're looking at, rather than the actual facts as to what they're looking at. It is a very similar phenomenon to people feeling like maybe ChatGPT is actually real, and they are having a real conversation with it, even though we know that's just not the case. And what was the most interesting thing to me, and the most sad thing, I think, was watching Mickey Atkins' video about how ChatGPT makes her a very dangerous and bad therapist, and then going into the comments where most of the people were defending it anyway. Most of them because they had trauma with therapists, or because the therapist shortage makes it impossible for them to get one, or they can't afford it, or they have no other friends and community to support them, and it's the only thing that listens to them. And while I do to some degree judge people just a little bit who use ChatGPT, because we will know at this point how terrible it is for the environment, how frequently wrong and untrustworthy it is, and how much you need to fact check it, so then it's no longer a shortcut to things, and I think that choice is fundamentally irresponsible. That comment section was also so indicative to me of how we have bigger problems than ChatGPT. I mean, ChatGPT, huge problem. Hopefully that's clear at this point. But again, the continued usage of it seems to be trying to fill some sort of societal and community gap that we don't otherwise know how to fill right now. And that's terrifying, but also at its core, it's just really sad. But going back to my comment about throwing disabled under the bus as an acceptable loss in the name of innovation, at the same time, our community keeps being used as a major justification for this technology, which I take issue with, to make people feel bad for saying anything negative about it. But most of those people can't actually tell you anything deeper about what those accessibility positives are upon being asked. Just that they exist as a general general concept. Most articles are just like, this is great for the disabled, and then don't say anything else. Now, the most promising uses of AI for accessibility are text-to-speech options and speech-to-text options. They seem to be the most effective things on both sides. Those things have existed for a really long time. I use text-to-speech software from Disability Services on my computer in college. That program was created in 2015. It's improved a lot since then, but the preliminary technology is not something that miraculously just popped up in the generative AI boom in the last 3 years. Let's not pretend that it has. One cool thing that's new that I will note is the Speech Accessibility Project, which is working to record lots of different folks with speech differences to better train audio recognition to understand different kinds of speech. Based on their website, it does look like they're still looking for participants. So if that is you and you are interested in helping out with that technology, I think this is a really great example of going after what disabled people actually need from technology, which is very rare. We'll talk about techno-ableism in a moment, but please look up what did I say it was called? The Speech Accessibility Project. It's with one of the branches of University of Illinois, if I remember correctly. Go check it out. Go be part of that if you want to do that. There's also been some improvement in screen reading technology and automated image description and audio description, but according to a June 2025 report from the New York City Bar, AI-generated responses have been found to provide inaccurate information to user prompts, which misleads people with disabilities who rely on the responses to summarize inaccessible content and other resources. Also, if you include your own alt text and things, which takes like an extra 5 minutes, automated image description is not really necessary anyway for people. Live audio description is obviously more complicated, but again, this tech really is not good at it right now. There's also some promising technology from Google Lens in Maps where you can point your camera at the area around you and it will help to auditorially navigate, which I think is really cool. I also read an article about an added chat function on a Google screen reader so you can ask clarifying questions about things on the screen, but I would assume this effectiveness would fall under the report from the Bar quoted earlier. I found an article whose primary positive for accessibility in AI was technology that can match certain skill sets with certain jobs for autistic people, which online skill set career quizzes have been around at least since I was in middle school, so that's not a look at the cool thing AI can do kind of thing. I also don't know why that is marketed as a win specifically for autistics when that's just general tech that would exist for everybody and everybody could kind of use it. That article was strange. There was also an article about how AI could reduce workweek time and how that's a win for disabled people, but did not elaborate on what that meant or how that would work. And then obviously the primary selling point, that is AI will cure cancer and diagnose all kinds of diseases before doctors would even notice it because of its superior pattern recognition and how bias-free a computer is. But to me, that is just a fundamental misunderstanding of the medical field. First of all, there would still be a need for extensive testing before any supposed cure of anything would be able to go out to the public, so it's not like AI is going to cure cancer tomorrow, even though a lot of tech bros act like it will. In general, with medical research, based on everything that I read, it seems like AI is about as helpful as your traditional statistical program, like R, for example, which have been around for a long time, in aiding with calculations and pattern recognition and speeding some of the technicalities of things up altogether, but it's not going to just magically do research or magically create something new that nobody has ever thought of or seen before. It still very much has to be human run. These AI models are to biologists like a graphic calculator and drafting software are to an engineer. You can ideate faster, but you still have to build a bridge and confirm that it won't crumble before driving across it. And of course, it is still liable to completely make things up, so you still need to cross-check much of what it's doing. It is a tool to complement a scientific team, not a cheat code to bypass it. It's also not as helpful for diagnostics as people want you to think. It doesn't matter if a certain test is 30 times more accurate at diagnosing something than it used to be if you can't convince your doctors to get you that test because they don't believe you. There's also a lot of nuance and patient experience that is largely ignored by the medical profession and thus isn't finding its way into the data set that AI has learned its diagnostics from, which might be important patterns. And the confidence in ignoring patient info and experience might become even more recklessly confident with the addition of a supposedly objective computer. And even then, AI comes up with lots of false positives causing extensive stress and unnecessary and expensive testing, so people debate whether this supposed enhanced detection is worth it to begin with. And a lot of these supposed AI detection things are actually looking at comorbidities, which is not the thing that it's claiming to diagnose. It's diagnosing a different thing. There's a recent study claiming that AI can detect autism and ADHD based on motor coordination, and yes, a lot of autistics and ADHDers do have dyspraxia, but dyspraxia is also a separate different thing that people can have outside of ASD and ADHD. So why are we pretending they're interchangeable? That does not make any sense. And it's also not completely unbiased either. AI is trained in all of the data we already have, and all the data we already have has an inherent bias to it. A diagnostic system is more likely to recognize things in a white, cishet, non-disabled man than it is in anybody else because all of our research on most medical things is on white, cishet, non-disabled men. If that's the bias the robot has been trained on, that is the bias it's going to spit back at you. It's not objective, it cannot be objective, and this is the case for all minorities to some degree. Take mortgage approval algorithms, which have been found to be 40 to 80% more likely to deny borrowers of color than their white counterparts. The reason is the algorithms were trained using data on who had received mortgages in the past, and in the US there is a long history of discrimination in lending. We can't fix the algorithms by feeding better data in because there isn't better data. AI is also often responsible for deciding whose medical care is covered by insurance, and it disproportionately denies care to disabled people, surprise, surprise, and there's also many stories of it cutting support systems for food, shelter, welfare, and medical needs due to errors that the people who run those companies cannot override, and thus those people just don't have support anymore because a computer glitched, which is horrible. Employers also use AI to hire employees and to track productivity of active employees, when productivity can mean a lot of different things that often devalues disabled people who have to work differently, or, you know, might have to take a year off of working for various medical reasons, which might be seen as a red flag by an AI, which is just a normal human thing that happens. A 2023 study also found that every single public chatbot model shows statistically significant bias against disability, and I guess a colleague of mine, we're gonna say, fellow disability creator and media representation human Jeremy Andrew Davis tried to get it to generate images of autistic people, and it exclusively gave him images of sad-looking, skinny young white men, because that is what it thinks autism looks like. There's also this term called techno-ableism that we've talked about before in my Turing test video, which is the belief that technology is the solution for disability, leading to the creation of technology that nobody in our community asked for, wants, or needs. I'm looking at you, every single attempt to create sign language to English translation gloves that have no understanding of the fact that like 50% of ASL is your facial expressions, and nobody wants your gloves. A lot of fancy prosthetics also fit into this category as well, and a lot of the things that people are talking about as being the reason AI is good actually fall into this category of stuff we do not want, did not ask for, is not even working properly, and an overall mindset that is just causing our community a lot of harm. AI is used to disproportionately benefit the privileged while worsening inequality. Are there a small handful of AI things that are now making life easier for disabled? Yes. Though most of them have already existed for a while, and it's just an improvement in technology over time and not the generative AI usually. But the vast majority of the time, they're just as glitchy and half-executed and unhelpful as every other AI thing that you're encountering on the day-to-day. It's all the marketing stuff that makes it seem like, yeah, I mean, the product doesn't work for you, but those disabled people out there, it's a game changer for them, so it can't be that harmful, right? And even I almost bought into that a little bit before I started this video. I assumed that stuff was happening I don't know about because I found ways to manually accommodate myself. I don't use very much assistive tech. But largely, the conversations in the disability community about AI are also pretty bleak. So at this point, I think it's pretty clear that AI is ableist because the data it's trained on are ableist, but the human use of minority community as the tagline for marketing is also incredibly ableist. It's banking on the idea that people will think tech created to solve disability is something that nobody can argue against as being helpful and important, and using this expectation as justification for this product that is actively stealing from artists, harming minority people, and killing the environment. And that's gross, and it's frustrating more than anything. So I normally try to wrap up my videos with some sort of like hope situation. Don't know where to leave you with on this one. But what I will say is that using your brain is increasingly important, thinking critically and knowing how to fact check things is becoming increasingly important, and trusting your gut when something doesn't make sense to you or doesn't seem like it's real is increasingly important. And obviously, don't use AI if you can. I know it's everywhere, I know it's hard to avoid, but like don't actively seek it out unless you're using it as a genuine access tool like text-to-speech or navigation or anything else. Point out to other people why using it maybe isn't a great idea, call out techno-ableism when you see it. I just refuse to be used as a justification for the existence of a thing that's actively harming my people, but maybe that's just me. In the meantime, I will link a fluffier video at the end of this one as a brain cleanse for you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being. Remember, critical thinking is really sexy and really important these days, and I look forward to seeing you, my dear, in the next one.